Sorry, I'm just hitting record. A little bit of information with regard to the Career Center. So for those of you who are on the call and maybe are not familiar, the Career Center does provide a variety of resources, especially virtual resources. So feel free to head to the website. There's a whole section on virtual resources, including our career guide, as well as getting into Handshake there. Obviously, if you're here, you've registered through this event with Handshake. If you do have questions about applying for jobs or other resources, please feel free to set up an appointment with one of our career coaches. You can do that also through Handshake. But today we really wanted to focus on kind of best practices for virtual engagement. And I know Rob and Blair will talk a little bit more at length about how Aramark has utilized video interviewing in the past. We know that about 70% of our employers for this year have indicated that they will be doing 100% virtual interviewing, which is very new for a lot of our students and many of our employers. So we really wanted students to hear from the experts about what that looks like, how it might be different from being interviewed face-to-face, and what they can do to really put forth their best foot forward, so to speak. So I will turn it over to Rob and Blair. And I will say, as we're progressing, if there are questions that come up, please feel free to use the chat function and type in your questions, and we can address those as we progress through the presentation.
Cool. Thanks so much, Kelly. Just a quick sound check. You guys can hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. So appreciate everybody getting on today. I know we have a little bit of a smaller group, but certainly appreciate the time. So the way that this will work is we'll obviously start with what's called a safety moment. So here at Aramark, we really value safety. We always say that that you should go home from work the same way that excuse me, that you showed up, which is safely. So one of the things we want to talk about today, just from a safety standpoint, is just obviously good hygiene when it comes to hands. It's specifically, it is very prevalent at this point in time. We're being encouraged to wash our hands a little more frequently, just due to the global pandemic, right? So washing hands with warm water and soap for at least 20 seconds. And if you obviously decide to do a little more, that's always fine. And then the other one's going to be disposable glove hygiene. So they have also become very prevalent just in society in general, given the fact that, again, we want to be conscious, of the surfaces that we're touching. And then, of course, anytime that, that we do touch maybe a surface that is not, I guess we'll say familiar to us, right? So if we're out at a supermarket or something like that, we certainly want to change our gloves first before we go ahead and touch anywhere on ourselves, right? Because what we're essentially doing is just taking the germs from, from a shelf in the supermarket directly to our face, right? So just a quick little tidbit there from us here. And of course, that's something that we utilize every single day in our operational environment. So of course, we always like to start any, Aramark sanctioned event with some sort of safety tip that can obviously, you guys can use throughout your daily activities as well. So one of the, I guess we'll say, we'll start with a little bit of an agenda, right? And we don't have anything formal. We certainly want this to be an open dialogue. But a couple things that we're going to talk about today are just going to be a dress code and interviewing surroundings. The second is going to be research. The third is going to be, connecting yourself to the organization that you're interviewing with, whether it be us or another employer. The fourth is going to be the STAR interviewing model, which I'm sure everyone's very familiar with, but we just want to give a quick refresher on that. And then, of course, the last piece is going to be networking, which as you all are on the call, you'll start to see that each one kind of leads into the next. I guess say the agenda is really set up intentionally to make sure that that we're following, in sequential order. So we'll start first with dress code, and obviously your interviewing surroundings. It's very self-explanatory, right? But we always want to dress for the job that we want, not the job that you have, right? Now, this can go for the pre-recorded video interviewing as well as the live interviewing as well, virtual. And I will just give a quick preface to say that that we here at Aramark have actually been utilizing the pre-recorded video interview process for about 2.5, 3 years now. So it's not something that's foreign to us. So, of course, we appreciate Kelly kind of calling on us to be the experts. We were one of the first employers to kind of have this functionality because we do recruit between 40 to 45 schools every single year. We're going to see a little bit of a shift this fall, just given a reorganization here with Aramark. But, we still plan to have the same amount of reach when it comes to connecting with a couple different, a couple different schools that we may not be able to, recruit on campus or, virtually sanctioned events through the university. We always say be mindful of the top that you're wearing, but also the bottom. If for whatever reason you have to get up during the interview for just a brief moment, we always say that, especially in a live video interviewing environment, certainly want to be conscious of your audience, right? Which is, going to be, essentially the campus recruiter or the college relations professional that you're going to be interacting with. We understand that, the price of suits or professional attire can be a big financial task to take on. We're not saying that you need to have 5 different suits in the repertoire, so to speak. But you certainly, want to stick to basic colors and basic prints, and one suit that fits really well, and that looks really well, and is constantly, dry cleaned and pressed, is always going to make a difference, in the long run. A big shout out, if you're going to wear a tie, if you're going to wear the tie, wear the tie. And what that means is, what we see pretty frequently is we see folks that are wearing ties, not necessarily, button the top button. So I went to high school right down the street from Temple at St. Joe's Prep. And, one of the things that they really preached is, if you can't get the last button, it's basically running a race and then stopping at the finish line. Right. So, if you're going to wear the tie, certainly button that top button. It does go a long way in terms of, kind of expressing to, your potential employer that you are professional and that you are going to be prepared. Big one for all of us. As you guys can see behind me, there's really not a ton. It's a very blank wall. I also just recently moved in here, so we don't have a ton in here. But as you can see, just a thermostat behind me, and then nothing else, right? So we always say be very aware of your surroundings. Again, we understand that it's self-explanatory, but you would be surprised at the number of people where we do hear background noise, either in the pre-recorded video interview where they're submitting it to us, or in a live video interview as well. We just want to give you the best possible opportunity to succeed in the interview environment. And of course, eliminating as many distractions as possible is going to be the best route to go. Now, as far as research, just as a general rule of thumb, you should always do the research on the organization that you're looking to interview with. Again, very self-explanatory, but what we mean is that we don't just want you to understand, general facts, right? We don't want you to understand the number of employees that they have, right? Or their mission statement, or those are obviously things that are very, very easy to find. What we always say is we want you to be able to look at the organization as a whole and ultimately identify a few different things that you're really passionate about that the organization is also passionate about, right? And so for us at Aramark, right, so we have just a little over 280,000 employees globally, right? So we operate in 18 other countries. And then, of course, here in the United States, we do have a very large presence as well. But we always like to see specific examples, right? And for instance, so we have an environmental sustainability initiative called the Green Thread. So that's always something that we encourage candidates to look into. If you're really, if you're environmentally conscious, if you want to, work towards a sustainable future, we do too, right? So we have to share the earth with the rest of the, 6.5 billion people here. And so we create initiatives from a company standpoint to make sure, that we're treating the earth properly. right? While also treating, our employees properly as well. The other thing too is that we just recently announced back in October of 2019 that we are going to have a frontline education program, right? And so what that means is that if you're an hourly associate with Aramark, you're able to, very similar to Starbucks, you're able to enroll into online classes at Arizona State for free, right? So Aramark will cover that bill for you. So just understanding, what we are doing as a company, and then ultimately, again, it's important to understand why Aramark does it, but I think it's even more important for the interviewer to understand why it's important to them and also how they can connect it to themselves, right? And I think that kind of leads into the next bullet point, which is connecting yourself to the organization. And again, we think that what most people find is that when they do their research, they're already looking for a way to connect themselves to the organization, right? So if you're doing that research, you're clearly interested in being a part of it. We just need to figure out what makes you go, right? Or what is your why, so to speak. We always encourage candidates to, to keep what's important to them at the forefront, of their job search, but also within the interview process as well. And Blair will talk about that a little bit too. But really, we want to make sure that candidates are always working towards something that they're passionate about, right? We always say that, it's not so much how someone is treated, but it's always about, how much someone cares, right? And so for us, we want to make sure, that we provide that support system to every single employee here. And we want to make sure that if we do something that you're really passionate about, not only during the interview process should you highlight that, but ultimately if you do earn that job offer, you want to continue on that path, right? Because that's something that is really important to you as the candidate, but also something that's really important to us. And then again, we always say that passion is key, right? So candidates who typically are passionate during that interview process, whether it be pre-recorded, whether it be a site visit, whether it be an in-person, whether it be a live interview that's held virtually via Zoom, they always tend to do really well, right? And so all we say is, truly be yourself during the interview process. It really gives us an opportunity to not only learn a little bit more about you, but ultimately we can start to connect the dots for you as a candidate, and be able to figure out what makes you go, and ultimately be able to keep that at the forefront of your mind as well as you're starting to look, for a future employer as well. And then, so I appreciate everybody giving me the time. So what we'll do next is Blair will go through, again, the STAR interviewing model, which again, most people are familiar with. And then of course, we'll kind of round out the conversation for us with networking. And then of course, we'll open it up to you guys for questions as well. I know we have about 45 minutes left, so we certainly want to keep it to about 20 to 25 minutes for us presenting, and then give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So one of the types of interview questions you may be asked in an interview would be behavioral-based interview questions. So using a STAR method, in order to answer, you would provide an example where you address the situation, the task, the action, and then ultimately the result of the situation that you are describing. So we can go ahead and break this down. So first off, we have situation. So obviously this is where you set the stage for the story, sharing context around the situation or the challenge that you faced. And it's really important here to share any of the relevant details regarding the situation. Then we have tasks. So this is where you would describe your responsibility or the role that you had in the situation or challenge. Maybe you presented an idea, maybe you solve the problem here. This is really where you focus on what you did to contribute to, the solution. Then we move forward to action. So again, explaining how you handled the situation or overcame the challenge. If it was carried out by a team, so let's say, for example, there are 5 of you, make sure you really focus on your efforts and what you contributed to the group as a whole. And then finally, we have results. So here is where you want to focus on the outcome of your actions. So if possible, if it was, a sales-based or there are numbers involved, make sure you get really specific and describe your success showing those numbers, or just make sure you're providing very concrete examples. So some examples of questions that you may be asked during an interview would be, share an example of a time when you faced a difficult problem at work. How did you solve the problem? And another one might be, tell me about a mistake you've made. How did you handle it? Or share an example of a time when you failed. What did you learn from the experience? So ultimately, using the STAR method, you'll be able to provide specific action-based examples, and just make sure, one piece of advice here, make sure you're being honest in your response and always share a positive outcome. So for example, one of the questions might be describing a time where you made a mistake or you failed. And obviously, that's a negative situation, right? But make sure in your response, you somehow show, how you learned from it. Maybe you were able to, turn the situation, spin it around into a positive outcome. Again, just make sure you're always focusing on the positive there. I think Kelly had a question. What do you do? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so what we hear often from students, particularly with behavior-based questions, there might be, I know I've done it before as a recruiter, and you say, can you talk to me about a time where you've displayed leadership skills? Or to your point, kind of taking a negative and spinning it into a positive. But what do you suggest if a student can't think of what they consider to be a really valuable, specific experience that would relate to that situation? Like, what if I feel like maybe I've never been a leader before? What is a good way to respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think so often we run into those situations. So I think first and foremost, I think it's great to be honest. Maybe if you've never had a situation like that, if you never experienced something like that, I think it's totally fine to be upfront and honest about that. But there are, maybe you've never had a leadership role where you've had someone reporting into you, but maybe in a group project, you oversaw a specific task, or you were able to delegate, if you could think of a situation where you might have, display leadership in a different way, not necessarily to a direct report, I think if you can find a parallel situation, that definitely works as well in those types of situations. That's a great question. And then moving on to networking. So networking can be a powerful tool, both in the interview process as well as once you've already been hired and you join an organization. So in the interview process, networking can really grant you opportunities that you might not be able to find on your own. So for instance, if a company knows, they have an opening on the horizon, they haven't yet posted it, or maybe it's still in the works, like I said, online, you might not be able to find that opportunity. But if you networked, you might, someone might think of you and think, Sarah might be a great fit for this opportunity. I'll reach out to her. And it can even set you apart from the applicant pool as well. So employee referrals can hold a lot of weight. So it never hurts to reach out to a former professor, a neighbor, a parent's friend, old boss, whomever it may be, just to request a referral, especially if you know that they work at the organization that ultimately, you would like to land a position. And then once you've been hired, networking can also help to advance your career. So making sure, you're getting involved, you're joining different employee resource groups, you're attending various trainings or seminars, that can really expand your network and give you exposure to different colleagues in different lines of business that maybe you normally wouldn't have. And the saying goes, it's not necessarily always what you know, but it's who you know. So, you never know when someone might be a resource to you. So it definitely never hurts to reach out, whether that's through LinkedIn, in person, email, and always make sure that you're staying in contact with people, in your network.
So really quick question. I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this. So when we're talking with students about networking and really trying to express the value that it can have, we often say, you want to reach out, but you don't want to reach out and say, can you get me a job at that company you work at? So what would you consider to be an appropriate or professional way to reach out, whether it's via a message on LinkedIn or primarily through a virtual platform?
Yeah, so I think I've had a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think it helps if you include your resume, first off. Reach out, maybe you've seen a position on our career portal that interests you. Express, I came across this opening, I'm really interested. State why you're interested, as well as why you think you'd be a good fit. Attach your resume, and then I don't think it ever hurts to say, would you be open to having a conversation to discuss my qualifications or discuss this position in further detail. I think that totally, never hurts to do.
Yeah, Kelly, I agree with Blair. I think the one thing that that kind of separates some folks from others, and again, I will say that we're going to be a little bit more accessible this year than I think we have in years past. We recruit again from Boston all the way down to Orlando and then all the way west, right? So for us, a big, I don't want to say challenge, but a big reason why we're unable to really get back to folks that are looking to network with us as quickly as possible is simply due to just travel. But I think one thing that I have always said is, stay persistent, but be professional at the same time. It's I think one of the things too is, I especially with email, we always kind of recommend, make sure you say hello and then the person's name that you're looking to contact. I think one of the big mistakes that some candidates may make is not addressing us at all. It's okay if you call me Mr. McCabe. I understand that's pretty formal. But again, just saying I have applied to, just kind of jumping right into it, not necessarily, the best route to go. Again, you can also say, I think Kelly, you're a great person to kind of point on as an example as well. You have emailed me multiple times and, have been a little bit slow to react. Right. And so, what you did is you took it to LinkedIn. Right. And then, just saturating the market, so to speak, or saturating the person's inbox to the point that, you want to be persistent, but not, I guess we'll say, annoying. So that's the one thing that I would say is, and it's a very, tough line to toe, right? We get that because we were in that situation too, right? So we understand that, we may not be able to get back to somebody as quickly as possible, but, being persistent in the approach, but also being professional is something that certainly goes a long way for us.
Great. I do have another specific question as it pertains to virtual interviews. I know you guys have talked about things that we should do. What are some of the key pitfalls or mistakes that you see students making when it comes to video interviews that you can maybe help our students try to avoid?
Yeah. So I think the biggest one is honestly just not completing the video interview. So I think what we saw and so we're working on some things to, on the, on our team to make sure that we give it that the experience for the candidate is a little bit easier. We're shortening the interview process, right? We're going from 7 questions to 4. It's just not realistic for somebody to answer 7 questions and be able to kind of block off that amount of time. So we're going to shorten the interview process. The second thing is that our email was a little wordy, right? So we're going to shorten our email a little as well. I think one of the biggest pitfalls though, so just so you guys are all aware, we had about a 35% completion percentage for our pre-recorded video interviews last year. I will tell you that we certainly have an opportunity to, to make that number a little bit better. But what we did see is that, so we actually are able to track when we send you an email out of our system if you've opened it or not. And so I think one of the things that's pretty interesting is that when we send the link, most times we don't send it to everybody. We actually don't send it to everybody. And so we're really making an intentional effort to give that person that we're sending the pre-recorded video interview an opportunity to interview with us. We're taking it seriously. We want them to take it just as serious. Again, we understand that, the college student juggles a ton. We completely understand that. But we also think the flexibility of the pre-recorded video interview really gives the student the opportunity to complete it when they can, but also within a realistic timeline, right? So we give 5 days for the interview to be completed. So, I think one of the things that, that we really would like to see, or one of the biggest pitfalls that we have seen, right, is sending the video interview out, but then the student not completing it. Which again, we understand they may lose interest in that time, and that's completely okay. But, again, I think it all goes back to, and again, we always have an opportunity to be a little bit better on the communication side, but just communicating to us that, hey, I appreciate the time. But at this point, I'm no longer going to consider Aramark as a future employer. And we have a dashboard that can actually track where the candidate is within the interview process. So it's a very easy, tool for us to use to be able to see where that person is. But again, I think really just completing the video interview is kind of the biggest pitfall that we have seen.
Yeah. I would say too, a lot of times I feel like video interviewing can be a little weird. Obviously it's very different than face-to-face, and sometimes you might slip up on a word, you might forget your response, and that's totally okay. It happens. I think, if it does happen, just keep going, own it. A lot of times I've seen students, especially in the pre-recorded video interviews, kind of get flustered, and you can tell they're upset, but it happens to all of us. It's totally okay. Just keep going, and don't be hard on yourself about it.
Hey, Kelly, just to interject. So one thing I will say, if you make a mistake, that's okay. We can actually send you another invitation to video interview. We understand that it is a little bit different than a live video interview, right? You can't backtrack on a recorded answer. But if you do slip up, or if you do feel like the answer that you gave wasn't adequate, we're pretty flexible in terms of letting you redo it. The only thing that we would ask is that as long as you tell us what happened, we're typically pretty accommodating to that.
So that's super helpful. I will say for myself personally, being at home, trying to work, it's a lot different. And I feel like what we're going into now this fall for a lot of our students and our employers is going to be a very different look and feel. To your point, within that 5-day time frame, I have a 7-year-old, and she is at camp right now, which is the only reason she's not jumping up and down right behind me. So there are circumstances that we're coming into that just are unavoidable. And so I do also want to encourage students, if you know that you're going to struggle to find a quiet space, you can get in touch with us at the Career Center. We do have space where you could come in and record videos and or do synchronous video interviews, because that's something that I know for a lot of students, especially if you're living with multiple peers, can be very difficult. So just to know, I think there's been a lot more flexibility, or at least that's the perception that I'm getting from employers, where the space that you're in right now just you may not have the availability to get in the professional space that you intend. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there as a resource. And I guess what other, if we're talking about those video interviews and specifically kind of the SMART technique, can you talk a little bit about, I find in my experience, a lot of students will have a situation and then they really kind of struggle with getting to the result. Can you talk a little bit about why you use the STAR technique and, you know, what you're really looking to get out of it from a student so that they can kind of see that bigger picture?
Yeah, sure. I think the biggest thing that, you know, we always say fail forward, right? Or, you know, I mean, the old adage is, if you try something, 99 times, you just figured out 99 different ways that don't work, right? And so what we're looking for really, and just so everyone is aware, majority of our opportunities that both Blair and myself recruit for are going to be, leading people, right? So being in a managerial role. We do have what are called some functional opportunities or some non-operational roles, being in, in finance and accounting and human resources and, IT, where, it's not necessarily, a very people-focused role, but, of course, what we're really looking to understand in that STAR model, right? Or as someone's going through a situation and really walking us through it, we're really just trying to figure out how they think, right? And what their problem solving skills are, or even if there's no problem, how they planned the work that was ultimately carried out. And again, we understand that, to go back to your, a previous question or, previous point saying that, what if I don't have that leadership experience? That's okay, right? As long as you can explain to us how you walk to yourself, because, you actually are a leader, whether you think it or not, right? Because you actually have to lead yourself on a regular basis. And so we always want to say, hey, if you're going to lead yourself, you're probably going to do it really well. So tell us how you led yourself through that problem. And so I think what some students do is they try to formulate an answer that we're looking for that will match the STAR model. The reality of the situation is that they may not be able to, and that's okay. What we're really just looking to understand, again, is just what their thought process was as far as problem solving techniques, and how they led their self more than anything else.
So there's a question in the chat, and it says, do you have any advice on how we can make a connection with employers virtually compared to in person during networking events?
Yeah. So we're I guess I'll unveil a little bit of our fall plan. And Kelly, I know we've talked about it previously. But on top of, our university sanctioned events that we will be attending, we are also going to be holding what are called open house events. So what this is it's based on a regional model. And we've essentially split the country into 4 parts: the Northeast, the Southeast, the Central, and then of course the West. And what we're doing is we're looking to provide students where we engage with them, their university or their college on a regular basis. We're just looking to give them, additional opportunities to understand what we have to offer as an employer. But then I also think, from a networking standpoint, LinkedIn is always going to be best. I think, when I was an operator with Aramark, I didn't really look too much into LinkedIn, because I always said I didn't have time. And then, as you start to, kind of progress along your professional journey, what you start to figure out is that a lot of people are on LinkedIn now. I always like to say, it's the Facebook of work. And even Facebook's kind of moving into the workplace as well. But I think LinkedIn is always going to be, your best bet. And then, of course, we're always open to, to any email communication that someone wants to have with us, or even, I mean, at the beginning of the summer, I had a conversation with a candidate that actually interviewed with us. She was in our internship program last summer. She actually she was not selected for the role that she interviewed with. Right. And so I think what's important is to, if you're looking for the additional information as to why maybe you weren't selected for a role or why you weren't, moved forward in the interview process, it's always okay to reach out and ask why. we will provide that information to you. And then we'll also say, hey, if you have any additional questions, or, please keep in touch with us in the future, because we also understand that, that the student is always a work in progress, right? So the way that you interview as a sophomore is not the way that you'll interview as a senior. So you always want to stay connected to us, because we have plenty of times where we don't select someone for the internship program. And then 2 years later, when they are a senior, they've really grown and they've really matured professionally. And so they give themselves the opportunity to actually earn, a spot in our leadership development program post-grad. So I would say LinkedIn is definitely the most powerful tool that we use. But then again, I think social media is another one as well, where, we're kind of kickstarting our Instagram content in August, which is something that, we've been looking to do for the last 6 or 7 months. So that's another way to stay connected with us. We manage that page, both Blair and myself. So if you reach out to us, if you direct message us there, that's another way to get in touch with us too. I think what we're starting to realize is that we really need to open ourselves up, to everybody else that's out there, especially since we're not traveling this year. So, I always say, please continue to reach out to us in those, within those platforms, because chances are someone will get back to you. Blair, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered most of that. Definitely LinkedIn, and even taking it a step further, making sure you are getting involved in attending various events, whether Aramark is hosting them or whatnot. Kind of putting in yourself out there, your name, your face, always kind of shows that you are interested as well. So aside from actually reaching out and whether that's via LinkedIn, email, actually showing up as well, and attending various events that Aramark will be holding virtually as well.
And I just want to clarify and kind of shout out what both of you mentioned with regard to professional organizations. It really, really can be a key factor in making some great connections. And a lot of times students are going to hear about these through faculty, through peers. You can always come to the Career Center and inquire. We have professional organizations that we stay in touch with, but it really can be a wonderful resource, and to your point, a way to make those connections. Another question I had, so as we move into the fall and we are going to be doing our virtual career fairs, the main thing that students are going to be able to do is to go into group sessions or one-on-one sessions with employers. What are some good questions that you would recommend that students bring into a group session?
I think it's always important to understand what the interview process looks like. I think one of the challenges that we face on a regular basis, as I started the call off, we have a little over 280,000 employees globally. So, I think understanding what you're getting into is certainly a question that I would always kind of, initiate as well. Everybody can take bad news, but nobody likes surprises, right? And so I think, that's when it comes to the interview process, right? So we're always constantly looking to improve the interview process. And I think we're really making a big step towards that this year. It's okay to ask. I think, the other question that, that we get a lot is, what for the position that I'm interviewing for, what will they be responsible for? And so for us, I think at the very early stages of the interview process, we're not necessarily looking to match someone or match a candidate with a specific opportunity that we have, because we actually figure out where our positions are going to be a little bit later on in our process. And so one of the things that we really do first is, we ultimately determine whether someone's going to be a good cultural fit or not, right? And so, we get a lot of questions about what does the culture look like at Aramark, and I always say, it's very different depending upon the location, right? Because, we service, just in higher education alone, we service over 500 colleges and universities across the country just for food service, right? So we're not even talking about, facilities management or the custodial side of our operation. And so I think it's hard for us to kind of capture what the culture looks like across all 500. But what we can tell you is that as an organization, we're always going to be focused on our customer. We're always going to be focused on our people. And we're always going to be focused on the environment, right? And so I think those are the three things that when you look at each one of our operations, it's very constant. And even at the functional side as well, on the corporate side, it is very true, right? That, we always try to make sure that everybody feels included. We were just recently ranked, by we're the 23rd most diverse employer in the world, right? So, that's something that we truly, kind of hang our hat on. So I think in the interest of time, I'll say, what does the interview process look like is typically something that we would see candidates ask. And then what does the culture look like as well? Are really two questions that kind of stand out to me for sure. But, of course, I'll let Blair, weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think another thing too is, being forward focused. An internship can really set you up for future success. So I think it's important to ask the question of, is an intern able to come back next summer? Obviously, assuming performance is up to standards. Do you have a postgraduate program? What do opportunities look like for once I graduate? What can I expect moving forward? I think those are really important questions to ask as well, because ultimately, it's your career and it's your future, and it's what kind of you want to get out of it, and you'll make the most of it. So I think it's important, when you are considering an internship program or an organization, what type of opportunities do they have for you if you do succeed within the internship, or if you do want to come back, what does that process look like, and are those opportunities available for you?
Great, thank you. Vera had a question. She says, there's some very common interview questions such as what are your strengths or what are your weaknesses? And there's a lot of really standard boxed answers for that. So how do recruiters look at these standard responses, and how should you really stand out when answering those types of questions?
That's so Vera first. It's a really good question. I'm not going to say that it's not, because it is. I think there are certain times where we do look for a specific answer. I will tell you that in our interview process, we actually don't ask those questions because we as an employer think that they're cookie cutter questions. And so what we think is that if you ask a cookie cutter question, typically you're going to get a cookie cutter answer, right? And so, one of the questions that we do ask, we're obviously very focused on our, we are in the service industry, right, across food, facilities, uniforms, and refreshments. And I think one of the questions that we ask is, what's one of the most stressful situations you've been through? And ultimately, kind of summarize that for us, but then we really want to understand how you guided yourself or potentially others through that, right? And so I think we're very intentional about the questions that we ask because they're directly tied to, our leadership competency model, right? And so we actually won't, unfortunately, so Vera, I'll say that we actually don't ask these questions. So hopefully, if you do have an employer that is asking these questions, we certainly encourage you to, if someone asks, what are your strengths? What we suggest is figuring out what maybe 2 or 3 of your strengths are, and then ultimately revert back to that STAR model, right? Because I think what an interviewer is ultimately looking for you to do is they're looking for you to actually create the example. They're not going to say, give me an example, but they are going to ask very open-ended questions in some cases to where they're looking for you to guide the conversation, which I think that's a perfect example to do. So that would be my advice on that, but I will tell you that we don't ask those questions. So it is tough for me to kind of give an example of that because, again, we're very intentional about what we ask. But at the same time, I would say that if someone does ask you a very open-ended question, we always say answer their question completely and then go back to the STAR model itself. Blair, anything you'd like to add? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Vera, that's a great question. So I think, the strength question, I think ultimately an employer is looking for what you value, the types of trades and, leadership characteristics that you value and you see as a strength. So I think ultimately that's what they're trying to get out with that question. And then the weaknesses part, again, I think it does kind of tie back to the STAR example where, you're making a positive spin on it. So you might be very impatient, but that means that you meet all of your deadlines ahead of time or on time, right? So, taking a weakness, but then obviously, twisting it into a positive, whether that's an outcome or a specific trait that you have, maybe, because you're so, anxious or whatever, again, you're meeting your deadlines, you're responsible, you're showing up on time. So again, making sure that you are finding the positive for the weakness question as well.
And I just want to add to that as well. And Rob, I couldn't agree more. I think, I don't think you get real value out of the responses to those questions. However, it's definitely something that a lot of folks that don't interview often think is a really great question. So one of the things that I did, and specifically for the job that I'm in now, I had not supervised people before. I was a team player, and I knew coming into this role that it required supervision. And so when someone asked what one of my weaknesses was, I kind of called out what I knew would be, a potential concern about my candidacy. And I said, well, based on the job description, a weakness that I have is that I have not directly supervised other full-time employees before. But I have supervised our intern program and, and went through other steps. So I also do encourage folks to look at, if you know that there's a gap based on your skills and the job that you're looking for, I think it's a really smart move to kind of call that out and then talk about how you would overcome it. Because that was something that I did particularly for this role. And I think it really helped that I wasn't pretending like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's not a weakness. It was like, no, I've never done it before, but these are the skills that I can bring to the table. So I also encourage that where that I might have 80% of what they're looking for, but there's a gap somewhere in there. So just another idea.
Yeah, Kelly, to add on that too, I think what we always say is that we always hire on potential, right? Not on what you can do right now. We know what you can do right now, but what you're capable of is certainly going to outweigh what you can do currently. So I completely agree. I've actually done that myself, believe it or not. So it is important to call that out as well. If you see something on the job description that to you is very glaring, right? I always say, the job description may say 3 to 5 years, of relevant experience in a required field, right? But if you're able to, sort of talk about why you don't have that experience or why you're looking to gain more, and ultimately show what you've done, from a portfolio standpoint to say, hey, look, I've done some work that, that pertains, like I think marketing specifically, right? So a lot of marketing degrees are really, entry-level roles are tough to come by, right? And so they're always looking for 3 to 5 years of experience for an entry-level role, right? And so what I always say is, not to call on Blair, but when Blair interviewed with us back in February, she actually brought a PowerPoint that she created on a campus recruiting plan. And Blair, up to that point, had never been in a supervisory role either. She was an individual contributor as well. But she ultimately showed that, at the end of the day, she's coming after my job, and that's okay, right? I think people are a little, shy away from those that show potential. We celebrate it, And of course, if you come prepared to an interview and say, hey, I've never actually done this specifically, but I can show you my body of work and what I'm looking to do in the next 3 to 5 years and what I can do in this position, that's super important for us. So kudos to Blair.
Great. If there are any other questions from our attendees, if you can throw them in the chat, that would be great. But I also wanted to give both Rob and Blair an opportunity to talk a little bit about Aramark's opportunities, or what you may have active now, or what you plan to be recruiting for come fall.
Yeah, so I didn't expect to plug any of our opportunities, Kelly, but certainly will take the opportunity to do so. I didn't want this to turn into, an ad hoc interview environment. So I'm certainly appreciative of that. So Aramark, for those of you guys that are not aware, if you are, fantastic. This is just going to be a little bit of, repeat information, but we have what are called two early talent development opportunities. One being our Step Up to Leadership, which is our internship program, typically happens over the summer. It's 10 to 12 weeks, and it is paid. For the most part, we don't have any housing. We can't offset any housing opportunities. But if you do work in a national park, whether it be Yosemite or Denali up in Alaska or Lake Powell, we're able to provide you with the on-site housing for 10 to 12 weeks. And then, of course, we do have what's called our leadership development program, which is the A2L or Accelerate to Leadership opportunity. It's a 12-month. Again, majority is going to be in a managerial role, but we do have some functional or individual contributor opportunities. But essentially what that is it's across all of our lines of business for recent graduates with a bachelor's degree. And what we do is we always say that, within the program, it's a 70-20-10 learning model. 70% of the learning is going to be done on the job, which we think, that is the greatest teacher experience. 20% is going to be a very formalized classroom type setting, obviously not sitting in the same place as everyone else, because we do have A2Ls across the country. So really tough for us to get them all in one place. But instructor-led courses. And then, of course, we have 10%, which is going to be more of the formalized what we call LMS or learning management software trainings as well. This could be, wage and hour compliance, food safety, occupational safety, all those types of things, just to make sure that we're preparing everybody for what's to come post A2L program. At the moment, we're actually not recruiting for any opportunities at this point. We have all of our A2L roles or Accelerate to Leadership roles locked up. But what we will be doing is we do have 2 class start dates for the A2L program. February and March is the first kind of chunk, which is what we consider the winter time. And then everybody else starts in July. So more of the seasonal opportunities like national parks or baseball, who knows? But those are typically the roles that we're going to be recruiting for in the February, March timeframe. And then, of course, everybody else starts in July. And again, these opportunities are nationwide. Sometimes we do assist with relocation for some of these roles. So if you're looking to check out a new part of the country, we may be able to provide some relocation assistance to you. Or if you're just looking to make a move in general, we're obviously going to have opportunities across the country for everybody. I think I hit all of them. Is there anything I missed, Kelly? I know the program's been around for a little while and you used to do it as well. So I just want to make sure that I have everything covered there.
No, you've got it all. Yes, for those of you who don't know, I actually used to be a part of the Aramark team, specifically campus recruiting. I was there for many years, and that's where I was before I came to Temple. So I'm very near and dear to my heart, know the A2L and S2L programs. So thank you so much. Were there any last tips or best practices that you wanted to share? And it doesn't even have to be like your Aramark hat. It can just be a recruiter hat about, this is a very different time than I think most of our graduates were anticipating. And so if there's any kind of tips or best practices to send us off with, we'd love to hear them.
I'll do one tip, and then Blair, you can do as many as you'd like. So one tip I always tell all of our candidates is, the job that you start in is not the job that you'll be in forever. And the reason why I say that is because I was actually, I've only been in this role for about 6 months. And so previously with Aramark, I was in an operational role. I worked in higher education, food service, right? And so what I ultimately figured out was that Aramark always had a place for me. I hadn't figured it out at that point, right? And so I think when you're trying to figure out where you fit into an organization, it's going to take time. Trust me, I understand that being patient is an invaluable virtue at this point. But what I also understand now that I probably wouldn't have understood if I didn't take that operational role is now I have the ability to, to really speak on it and really understand what our business looks like, right? And so, sometimes it's not always, the move that someone, I don't want to say wants to make, but sometimes there are certain, barriers to, to finding your, I guess we'll say your absolute role, right? And so I think be patient and enjoy the process, right? I always look at every single interview as an opportunity to, to sharpen your knife, so to speak, right? I think that's super important. But again, understand that the role that you start in will not be the role that you're in forever. If it is, then you found your home. Right. And that's awesome. But we also understand that about 80 to 85% of recent grads really don't have a ton of an idea of what they want to do long term. And that's okay, because guess what? We have everything to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say just, really make the most of it. Once you do accept an internship and you start somewhere, get as involved as you can. If you know of a group project or, an organization within the company, get involved, ask to shadow, ask to attend. When you think about it, all of these activities and experiences and exposure, eventually they're going to make you a well-rounded candidate for the future. And it could be something that you could speak to in a future interview. It could be something you put on your resume. So, again, kind of having that, forward-facing vision, making the most of it, because it all, it's going to pay off, and it will overall contribute to, your career in the long run as well.
Thank you both so much. Really, really appreciate your time and being able to connect with our students and alumni. So we are going to wrap this session up, and I just want to let all of our attendees know that if you do have questions or follow-up, you're welcome to head to the website as well as onto Handshake. You can schedule appointments with coaches. I am not particularly available for coaching appointments, but if you do have questions, I have lots and lots of experience in going through the job search process. I'm Kelly Hart. You can find my information in my email right on the website. But otherwise, for Rob and Blair, I will be seeing you hopefully soon for some work that we'll be doing for fall recruitment. And thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Kelly.